The story of World War I. The year was 1914. A single gunshot in the city of Sarajevo shook the entire world. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, was like a spark that set fire to a dry forest. Within weeks, nations across Europe were pulled into a war that no one had imagined would be so vast, so destructive, and so tragic. This war, later known as the First World War, or the Great War, changed the face of history forever. The world before 1914 was full of tension. Europe was divided into powerful alliances. On one side was the Triple Alliance, made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. On the other side was the Triple Entente, which included Britain, France, and Russia. These countries had been building huge armies and navies, competing for colonies, and preparing for possible conflicts. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914, gave Austria-Hungary a reason to punish Serbia, where the assassin came from. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia came to Serbia's defense. Germany supported Austria-Hungary, and soon France and Britain joined against Germany. Within a short time, most of Europe was at war. World War I was different from earlier wars. It was the first truly global war. Battles were fought not just in Europe, but also in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Millions of soldiers from colonies of European powers were brought in to fight. The war introduced new and deadly weapons. Machine guns, tanks, airplanes, submarines, and poison gas turned the battlefield into a nightmare. The old style of fighting, with horses and swords, disappeared. Instead, soldiers lived in trenches, long, narrow ditches dug into the ground. Life in the trenches was terrible. Soldiers faced constant fear, mud, cold, hunger, and the danger of sudden attacks. The Western Front between France and Germany became the center of the war. For years, armies fought back and forth with little progress. Battles like Verdun and the Somme became symbols of horror. In the Battle of the Somme alone, more than 1 million soldiers were killed or wounded. On the Eastern Front, between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia, the fighting was just as fierce. The war also spread to the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, where battles took place in deserts and mountains. The war did not only affect soldiers. Civilians also suffered greatly. Cities were bombed, food became scarce, and diseases spread. Entire generations of young men were lost. Families were broken, and economies collapsed. Women, who had once stayed mostly at home, now worked in factories, hospitals, and farms to keep their countries running. This changed society forever, giving women more rights after the war. As the war dragged on, new nations entered the conflict. In 1917, the United States joined the Allies after German submarines sank American ships and after the famous Zimmermann telegram, where Germany tried to make Mexico its ally. The entry of the United States gave fresh energy to the Allies. On the other side, Russia was collapsing under the pressure of war and internal revolution. In 1917, the Russian Revolution broke out, and Russia withdrew from the war. By 1918, Germany and its allies were exhausted. Food shortages, economic problems, and low morale weakened them. The Allies launched a final offensive with the help of American soldiers. Germany realized it could no longer win. On November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed, and the fighting finally ended. The war had lasted 4 long years. The cost of World War I was almost unimaginable. More than 16 million people, both soldiers and civilians, died. Millions more were wounded or displaced. Whole cities and villages were destroyed. The war also brought an influenza epidemic that killed millions worldwide. People called it the war to end all wars, hoping that humanity would never repeat such a disaster again. In 1919, world leaders gathered in Paris to make peace. The Treaty of Versailles was signed with Germany. The treaty punished Germany harshly. It had to give up land, colonies, and pay huge reparations. Germany was also forced to accept full blame for the war. While the treaty ended the fighting, it left behind bitterness and anger that later helped cause World War II. World War I also led to the end of empires. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire all collapsed. New countries were created in Europe and the Middle East. The League of Nations, the first international organization to try to keep peace, was formed, though it later failed. The Great War changed the world in countless ways. It brought new technology, changed societies, and redrew maps. It showed the terrible power of modern weapons and the huge cost of human pride and political ambition. It also left deep scars in the minds of people. Writers, poets, and artists described the war as meaningless destruction, while others tried to find hope in the sacrifices made. Even today, more than a century later, the story of World War I reminds us of the dangers of nationalism, rivalry, and unchecked power. It teaches us that war is not glory, but tragedy, and that peace must always be protected with wisdom and cooperation. The gunshot in Sarajevo that started the war was small, but the storm it created was massive. The world of 1914 thought the war would be over in a few months. Instead, it lasted 4 years and changed history forever. The First World War was not just a war between armies. It was a war that reshaped nations, societies, and the future of humanity. Word count, H20T.